Hi guys out there, just a quick video about the differences between the Gibson Les Paul and the Fender Stratocaster. I know there's quite a few videos on YouTube covering this subject already, but this is just my take on it. And if it sounds like I'm slanted or biased a little bit towards the Les Paul, it's because I am. I am a confirmed Gibson man, a Les Paul man. I'm not really a Stratocaster man, although I have owned a few. And I like the guitars. I like the Fender. I like the Stratocasters, but I like the Les Pauls better. So anyway, don't kill me for that. I've done a video on this. This is a late 70s, maybe 79, 78, 79 Fender Stratocaster, you know, heavily modified with the mirror pick guard and, you know, the knobs, you know, the chrome domed knobs and so on. Like I said, I've done a video on that. This Les Paul, although it looks like a Sykes Les Paul, and because I made it to look like that, this is really a 1981 Les Paul custom, and it came with the nickel option. Back in those days you could get Les Paul customs with either gold hardware, which was more expensive, or nickel, which Gibson did to make them a little bit less expensive. And this one came with nickel, so you know, the tuning pegs were nickel finished, the Tune-O-Matic bridge and the TP6, the fine tuning tailpiece, were all nickel. I added the pickup trim rings. They're really chrome, and I added the pick guard, which is also, you know, polished aluminum, chrome, whatever, and the Selector switch cover, just like, you know, John Sykes did. Mine was part of the way there, so I just took it the rest of the way. You can see in the background there, I also have, you know, one of his straps, a replica of his exact strap, which is really cool, really big, really nice heavy strap with lots of metal studs on it. But anyway, this is a legit 1981 Les Paul custom, maple neck. I call it the Metal Monster just for that reason. Alright, so anyway, on to the differences. We can start with the headstocks up here. You can see the Gibson is a 3x3 headstock, and the strings coming over the nut come off at a, you know, a bit of an angle to the outsides, not straight. This headstock is also angled back at, well, in the early days Gibson did a 17-degree angle. The newer ones I think are about a 14-degree angle. The Fender has no angle whatsoever. It's angled back because the headstock face itself is dropped down from the neck, but the strings go straight over the nut, straight to the tuners. It necessitates the string tree there, the two string trees, because that angle, the drop-off angle there off the nut, is so severe. Interesting thing about the Fender headstock is that is actually designed to look like, you know, a violin, a cello, a mandolin headstock. If you took a profile of it, you know, one plane of it, and cut it out, you know, and Leo Fender designed that, and it's, you know, this is a 70s one, that the larger one, you know, the regular, the small sized one, the Stratocaster headstock is possibly, you know, the best design headstock of all time, you know, in my opinion. He just nailed it. It's just perfect. This one in the 70s, you know, the truss rod is adjustable up at the top. As you know, most Fenders, they're adjustable here at the base of the neck, which usually facilitates removing the neck from the guitar, or some guys put a little cutout here in the pick guard to get at the truss rods. Single adjusting truss rod, single action truss rod, which means, so the strings pull the neck, they try and bow the neck up. You know, the strings pull the neck up, the truss rod bends it back down. So a single adjusting truss rod for both the Stratocaster and the Les Paul in this case. Gibson actually invented the truss rod, or they patented the truss rod. You know, who can say who invented these things or not? They patented the truss rod in 1921, so that's one of their inventions. Again, who came up with the first electric guitar? I'm not really going to get into that. Was it Les Paul? Was it Leo Fender? You know, who invented it first? Who patented it first? Who marketed it first? That's not what this video's discussing. So anyway, back onto the necks. The scale length on a Stratocaster, you know, the measurement, the gross measurement from the nut to the bridge is 25.5 inches on a Stratocaster. On a Les Paul, that same measurement from the nut to the bridge is 24 3/4. So it is, you know, it's a 1/2 inch difference there. It's easier to bend strings on the shorter scale. That's just a fact. No editorial there. The necks, in addition, have a radius, which is the actual curve. It's the curve of the fretboard. Whereas if you took this curvature and turned it into a circle, you know, a full circle, what would the radius be? And the Fender is, I believe, it's the early Fenders, you know, from the 50s, the ones everyone's talking about, it's a 7 1/4. So that's a pretty healthy radius. That means there's a lot of curve in that neck. The Gibsons, you know, to this day, that is a 12-inch radius. So if you took that curvature and made it into a full circle, that's a 12-inch, which is a much bigger circle, which means it's much flatter. Again, the flatter radius are better for bending, better for single fretted notes, and soloing, if you will. The curved radius is definitely better for chording. I mean, plenty of people have made plenty of beautiful music and solos, you know, Jimi Hendrix, Richie Blackmore, Stevie Ray Vaughan, Eric Clapton, you know, David Gilmour. I mean, the list is on and on and on of, you know, people who've done just some of the most amazing recorded works and guitar solos with that radius. So, you know, take that for what you will. It's definitely harder to bend strings on the Fender. You got to want it more. You got to be, that's more of a man's guitar there. It's, you know, a lot more finger strength in that. Of course, the Fenders came with the Tremolo system, the vibrato they called it, which is just a brilliant design. The strings go all the way through that. The springs in the back, and you can move the pitch up and down with that. That's a great thing. The Fenders, of course, the most obvious difference I'm missing here is that a Fender's a bolt-on. The neck and the body are two pieces held in place with, in this case, this is a 70s again, so it's a 3-bolt, but for most cases it's held in place with 4 large wood screws holding it in place. The Gibsons it's a set neck. It's a mortise and tenon joint, so this is glued, these two pieces are glued together, and this neck actually extends somewhere down into here. There's a huge chunk of wood glued in there, and there's a finely tuned joint where there's almost no room between the joint, just barely, you know, fractions of millimeters in between those joints to accept the glue, to glue those pieces together. So the Fender, this neck is maple. It's, you know, in the early days, you're 1 piece of maple or 2 pieces of maple glued together. This is 1 piece maple. You could get a rosewood fingerboard on a Fender. The Gibsons, maple wasn't available in these days. You could only get a ebony fingerboard on a custom like this, or you could get a rosewood fingerboard on a standard guitar. So the nut widths. Fender, the standard nut width, the width of that nut is 1 5/8 of an inch. The Gibson is 1 11/16. So 1/16 bigger on all the Gibsons. So the Gibson has a wider, flatter neck. Again, whatever your preference is, doesn't matter. Those are just the differences in them. The Gibsons, for the most part, all had binding. You know, this is a custom, so it has double binding on the front and the back and the neck. The standards had binding on the neck and only binding on the front. The bodies of Gibsons are pretty standard, where they are made of mahogany. The neck is made of mahogany, and there's a maple cap glued to the top of this. And this is curved. This is an arch top, you know, again, like a violin or a cello. A pretty nice feature. I mean, these guitars are truly, I mean, there's a lot of automation in the building process, but they are handmade instruments. The Fender, on the other hand, it's a mass-produced guitar. I mean, they've made hundreds of thousands, millions more of the Stratocasters than the Les Pauls, and that's just the way it is. Their bodies were made of, in the early days, there was some ash and alder, depending on the finish. If you were getting a sunburst finish or a natural finish, you would get ash. If you were getting a painted finish, you would get alder. I mean, that was only for the first few years. Ash was phased out within the first 3 or 4 years of Fender's production. And again, anytime there's any kind of blemish, you got a painted guitar. If it had a nice top, that's when they would make a sunburst, a 3-tone sunburst or a 2-tone sunburst out of the the nicer figured guitars there. Fender had, you know, 3 single coil pickups, which they have their own sound. You know, they sound fantastic in their own right. It's thinner. It's a weaker signal. They use 250 ohm pots. You know, on a standard Fender, it's volume for the bridge in the middle, volume for the neck, and a tone, which curiously, the tone only affects the middle and the neck pickup standard. So I don't know why. You can easily modify that with just a little jumper wire so that the tone will be a, you know, a universal tone for all of them, but that's the way the early Fenders, that's the way they did it. In the old days, this switching was a 3-way switch where you had the bridge pickup, position 1, the middle pickup, position in the middle, and the neck pickup with a 3rd position. Guys figured out early on that you could jam these switches in the middle, in the positions in between, and you could get these 2 pickups on at the same time, and then in this other position you get these 2 pickups on. So Fender ingeniously came up with the 5-way switch so that you could get position 1, position 2, position 3, position 4, position 5. Pretty cool. Gibson, standard to this day, is 2 volumes and 2 tones, you know, 1 for each pickup, and they sit, you get used to it, but they sit kind of far away from your playing position. The pickup selector is this 3-way. You know, you've got your, they call it the treble pickup or your bridge pickup, both pickups, and your rhythm pickup or your neck pickup, like that. And that falls in your very natural position, your natural playing position there. The cost of these things originally, you know, the Fenders with a tremolo system were $250, something like that, in the 50s, and the you get a 2 1/4. That's a retail price you probably get on the street, even in the 50s, cheaper than that for a hardtail. You know, the Les Pauls were more expensive. You know, a custom would be $375, you know, maybe $400. A standard, which are worth, you know, hundreds of thousands today, back in the day were, you know, like $280, something like that. You know, Gibson originally had single coil pickups. They had P90s, the Soul Bar pickups. These are obviously humbuckers. In 1957, an engineer who worked for Gibson named Seth Lover came up with the humbucking pickup, which, you know, he married a dummy coil to your single coil. It cancels that 60 cycle hum that's picked up from interference, usually from overhead lights, etc., like that. Not really a big deal. You get that 60 cycle hum on the Fenders. It's all part of their charm, and once it's grounded with your fingers on the strings or any part of the guitar, you don't really hear the 60 cycle hum. And so let's see, what did I go over? I went over the nut, I went over the scale length, I went over the switching. Now the sound, that's so subjective. You know, it's, in my opinion, some of the best created sounds ever with 2 guitar bands that had a Stratocaster and a Les Paul. Les Paul is a fuller sound, a more, I don't want to say, a more rich sound. It's definitely fuller, a little more beefier. Fender's a little bit thinner, a little bit more on the treble side. But again, I mean, can you go wrong with, you know, Jimmy Page versus, you know, Ritchie Blackmore, or, you know, Stevie Ray Vaughan? You know, Jeff Beck has used them both, and then he's had just fantastic recordings with both of them. So it's really your preference. It's funny because so today a Fender will cost you, you know, around $1,000, $1,200, whatever, for an American standard Strat, and a Les Paul Custom is going to cost you $4,000, you know, maybe $3,000 for a standard. So, you know, the more times change, the more they stay the same. But yeah, so that's just my quick little video there on the differences between the Fender Strat and the Les Paul. And I'll say the Fender Strat, that design, the double cutaway, the scoops there so you can reach every position on the neck, you know, the arm cut out here, the belly cut out here. It's just one of the best designs I've known to man. Of course, Fender only has 21 frets. Gibson gave you 1 more so you could get that, the D, and you can bend it up to get that high E. Fender, you know, they give you the 22 frets. That's, of course, one of the main differences. You know, most Fenders give you 22 frets these days, but just historically, 21 frets, 22 frets. Oh, the Fenders are much lighter average Fender is between 7 and 8 pounds. About a little over 7.5 pounds is an average for a Fender. So Les Paul, a good standard is high 8, low 9 pounds. Custom is going to be more, 9 or 10 pounds, but I've seen hefty 10, 11 pound Les Pauls, and you guys know what I'm talking about. Doesn't seem like much, but when it's on your shoulder and you're playing it for a long time, that 2 or 3 differences in pounds is huge. So I hope you like this video, the differences between the Fender Stratocaster and the Gibson Les Paul, and as always, thanks for watching.